Okay, hi. We're back to our second half of the Phaedo. That's how you want to think about it. So this is a natural point in the dialogue to break it, as I think you'll see in a moment. So what we have seen so far is that, let me get this up here, philosophy is the practice of death or a practice for death because it tries to separate soul from the body because the body hinders the soul, according to Plato, gets in the way of knowledge, wisdom, of just not only the practice of it, but also seeing it correctly. We also saw three arguments for the soul's survival. We saw near the end of the last section that because the question of the nature of the soul, this is a question about the nature of the soul, and the soul is an intelligible thing, we have to have a pure vision, as pure as possible to know it. Bodily vision here would actually get in the way and inhibit true vision. And so Socrates suggests that people don't believe they have a soul or don't believe it will survive death because they don't see it clearly. They've almost nailed their soul to their body, he says. And this raised the issue I tried to bring up at the end of the last video about the role of morality in seeing the truth. If you understand separating the soul from the body as living a moral life, disciplined, self-controlled, um, with integrity, and that therefore not all teachers of philosophy or wisdom would be equal. Okay. At this point in the dialogue, this is an interesting point. Socrates stops talking. It says Socrates had done speaking, and for a considerable time there was silence. So I imagine everybody in the room kind of, oh, what's going on? He just made this longer speech and made some claims about important uh, aspects of our lives that we should be living, and then he kind of shuts up and starts thinking about it. So there's my picture of him meditating, and nobody wants to disturb him because, of course, this is a last day of his life. He's about to be executed, um, and there even seems some reticence, and people are afraid to speak up. But eventually, they do, and they ask him if they can talk. And Socrates says, "Well, speak and ask anything you like." And at this point, we get two objections. So remember, we said nobody seems to be upset with the argument as they're coming out. Like, you can't do this, arguments like this can't be done. But they do have questions or objections, depending on how you want to put it, against the arguments that Socrates have said. So we got Cebes and Simmias again. And here's their objections. So let's see if they make sense to us. So Simmias says that the simplicity argument would apply to a harmony in a tuned lyre. But a harmony obviously does not exist beyond the destruction of the lyre. So what he's thinking of here is, well, if you think about simple things, um, he says, harmony maybe it doesn't helpful to us, but if you think about it, I used to play guitar, and you can't play your guitar until you tune it, which is tightening the strings to get them into a certain pitch. And when you got them to that pitch, they sound good, they sound like a particular note, they're in tune. Now, if you imagine somebody taking a flamethrower and just burning the entire guitar, well, that tuning, that state of being in tune, that disappears when the guitar disappears. Okay, and so the suggestion here, isn't that what the soul is like? The soul is kind of like a tuning in the body. You get the parts of the body working the right way, in the right kind of organization, you have a soul. And if that body was to be destroyed, well, there's no reason to think that soul would hang around, just like there's no reason to think the tuning of an instrument would hang around. The other objection raised by Cebes is more about whether the soul will be totally indestructible. So he gives the analogy of an old cloak passed on from father to son. He said maybe the soul is like that. So it's stronger than the body. It will outlast death, but maybe like that old cloak, eventually it will wear out. And shouldn't the philosopher worry that maybe his death is like the last gasp of the soul. The soul will no longer able to be carried on. So this seems to also be assuming that souls get passed on to different people. Reincarnation, which does seem to float around a little bit in this dialogue. Okay, and they're not uncomfortable with raising it up. Okay, so those are the two objections. And Socrates doesn't immediately answer them. In fact, the thing breaks off and Echecrates pops in. So you remember Phaedo's talking about telling this story to Echecrates, and Echecrates go, whoa, he's kind of, wow, you got these arguments, everything seems to be fine. And then Simmias and Cebes sort of, boom, here comes, they see, well, what's Socrates going to do? I'm trying to build up a little bit of a dramatic effect here. Okay, and I think of Cebes, Echecrates as those two guys from the Muppets, and that's why they're up there, kind of heckling. Although they're not just heckling, he's kind of worried about Socrates. If Socrates' argument fails, maybe he's going to lose hope and he'll die in a state of sadness and forlornness. And it's a brief little interlude, but then Socrates starts talking to Phaedo in the dialogue. And it's kind of interesting. So before he gets into talking about Cebes and Simmias, he talks about the dangers of what he calls Misology. Okay, so Misology is, he says, it's like misanthropy, which is the hatred of human beings, and Misology is the hatred of logic, misology. Okay, and he says, because we question an argument, push an argument, maybe even defeat or refute an argument, we should not take that as a sign that argument itself, rational discourse, Socratic dialectic, is not worth doing, is not going to get you anywhere. As he says at the very beginning, the failure of one argument does not mean the failure of all intellectual inquiry. You remember in the Gorgias, Socrates says, I want to be refuted if I'm wrong, not because I want to give up thinking about this and going anywhere with this, but because I don't want to hold the wrong beliefs. The point of any sort of rational inquiry is to learn the truth. And you can't have the truth if you hold it by means of a bad argument. Of course, you could you could accidentally be correct, but your argument doesn't work right, so you don't know why you're correct. So this is an important piece of Socrates' trust in logic and in his vision of the soul. Remember, he sees the soul because he's practiced a certain kind of life. So he is sure about its nature and that it can't be destroyed by death. And he's wanting Cebes and Simmias to get to that state in their lives so that their argument is reinforced by all their life's experiences. And 2 points are made here that Socrates wants to warn us about. Okay, the first one, oops, it looks like I skipped it. The first one is this, that we should be careful, he said, of allowing or admitting into our souls the notion that there is no health or soundness in any arguments at all. Again, one argument fails does not mean every argument is going to fail. Rather, say that we have not yet attained to soundness in ourselves. So if we can't come up with a good argument, that's something that the problem with us and not the problem with argument. So here we're seeing a big trust in the process, right? And then the second interesting point, he says, is I would ask you to be thinking of the truth and not of Socrates. Agree with me if I seem to you to be speaking the truth, or if not, withstand me might and main, that I may not deceive you as well as myself in my enthusiasm, and like the bee, leave my sting in you before I die. So he's welcoming arguments and he's welcoming objections. Don't not object because of your fondness of me, because of your love of me, or because you're worried that I might be upset and I'll lose my hope in life after death. Okay, this is an interesting point that Cebes and Simmias are from Thebes, and they seem to be the only two people that are able to talk to Socrates in this discussion. The rest of his friends, remember Plato's not there, but Phaedo, Echecrates, Crito, they are all too caught up with the fact that Socrates is going to die to actually raise these sorts of questions. And we might wonder, who does Socrates appreciate most? Does he? Of course, he appreciates his friends, but maybe he appreciates these two, I don't know if his friends, but his acquaintances, Cebes and Simmias, more, who come to push his arguments, even on the last day of his life, even when they seem to be hinging on how he feels about his execution.